What happens when the people sworn to defend justice are punished for simply doing their jobs? That was the question echoing through the chamber when Representative Deborah Ross confronted FBI Director Kash Patel, laying bare accusations that shake the very core of public trust. It wasn't about statistics or policy jargon, it was about the lives and reputations of agents who dedicated decades to the Bureau, only to find themselves suddenly cast out. From the first words, Ross's interrogation made one thing clear: this was no routine oversight hearing. This was an unmasking of contradictions, where promises made under oath collided with actions that suggested something far darker.
I'm going a little out of order here because I'm going to pursue some of the things that you were just talking to Mr. Fry about and remind you about your confirmation hearing. At your confirmation hearing in January, you said under oath, and I quote, "There will be no politicization at the FBI. There will be no retributive actions taken by the FBI should I be confirmed." And in your written response to the Senate questionnaire, you said, I quote, "Personnel decisions shall be based on performance and adherence to the law. And every FBI employee will be held to the absolute same standard, and no one will be terminated for case assignments." So I want to just go through a couple scenarios with you to get a sense of whether you think these are examples of politicization of the FBI or making decisions based on the performance and adherence to the law. So, first question. Would hiring FBI agents, analysts, and supervisors from only one political party being politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
We don't ask FBI people, applicants, where their political parties are.
Mr. Patel, do you ask FBI applicants who they voted for?
The FBI does not.
Are you aware that in the lawsuit that Mr. Driscoll filed against you and the FBI, he was asked who he voted for?
Since that lawsuit has been filed and it's ongoing litigation, I'm not able to comment.
Well, but it also means that you just said that what happened in his situation didn't happen. So we will go on to the next question. Let me ask you an even easier one. Does firing agents for working on the cases that they were assigned to and that the president didn't like, is that politicization of the FBI or making personnel decisions based on performance and adherence to the law?
The FBI doesn't terminate anyone based on case assignments alone.
Has the FBI ever been sued by somebody who felt that they were terminated based on case assignments?
In the entire history of the FBI, I'm sure they have.
No, since your tenure.
I'm sure there's ongoing litigation.
Yes. In fact, there is ongoing litigation. And in fact, people have been asked who they voted for. And in fact, you are running an FBI for the President of the United States rather than the people of the United States, because my questions were not hypotheticals. They are the things you have done during your tenure. And according to a lawsuit filed last week by long-term FBI agents, you fired former acting director Brian Driscoll. He had served with the Bureau for nearly 20 years, earned a Medal of Honor, Medal of Valor for bravery during the dangerous ISIS raid, and had a wealth of crisis response experience and led the FBI's critical incident response group. When the Trump administrations interviewed Mr. Driscoll for that role, they interrogated him about his political leanings and who he voted for in the last 5 elections. Questions Mr. Driscoll refused to answer because those types of questions impermissibly politicized the FBI. You also fired Steve Jensen, who served the FBI for nearly 2 decades and ran critical terrorism, counterintelligence, and organized crime operations, whom you once described as embodying what the American public demands of the FBI. But he was fired because he took part in investigating crimes committed on January 6th. And Trump's MAGA base lambasted you online for keeping him at the FBI. So he's no longer at the FBI. You also fired a decorated combat veteran with decades of experience in the Bureau, Special Agent Walter Jardia, because he worked on the investigation into the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and helped investigate Trump's ally, Peter Navarro. Director Patel, it is very clear that you have flunked your own test. You've put saving your job, which I actually believe you were being honest about during your confirmation hearings, over doing what's right for the FBI and the American people. That is not adherence to the law. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleladies.
During his confirmation, Patel had looked senators in the eye and sworn that the FBI would never be politicized under his leadership. He promised there would be no loyalty tests, no political litmus questions, no retribution against agents who were assigned to sensitive cases. Personnel decisions, he vowed, would always be based on performance, adherence to the law, and nothing else. Those words were meant to reassure Congress and the public that the FBI would remain independent, impartial, and untouchable by politics. Yet Ross wasted no time reminding him of that vow before stacking the evidence that suggested the opposite. For viewers, the opening exchanges were gripping not because of abstract theory but because of what was at stake: the independence of America's top law enforcement agency. Ross began with a simple test of principle. Would hiring agents only from one political party, she asked, be considered fair and lawful, or would it be politicization? Patel dodged. He insisted the FBI does not ask about political affiliation, but Ross pressed harder, citing a lawsuit that revealed precisely that kind of questioning had taken place. She asked him directly whether FBI applicants or staff had been asked who they voted for. His reply was cagey. The FBI, he claimed, does not engage in such questioning. Yet the lawsuit from a long-serving FBI leader alleged otherwise. That contradiction cut to the heart of the issue. If the FBI director himself says it doesn't happen, but sworn legal documents say it does, who can the public trust? That question hung heavy in the room, setting the tone for everything that followed. The first case Ross highlighted was that of Brian Driscoll. His name alone carried weight inside the Bureau. For nearly 20 years, Driscoll served with distinction, eventually rising to acting director of a critical division. He had been decorated with a Medal of Valor after showing bravery during a dangerous ISIS raid, a credential that should have cemented his reputation as an asset to the Bureau. But when the time came for his promotion interview, things veered into troubling territory. Instead of focusing on qualifications, Driscoll was grilled about his political views. He was asked who he voted for in recent elections, probing into his private choices in a way that clashed directly with the principle of nonpartisanship. He refused to answer. For that he paid the price. According to the lawsuit Ross referenced, Driscoll was sidelined and ultimately fired. In one blow, a veteran agent decorated for valor was discarded, not for misconduct, not for failure, but because he refused to pledge allegiance to a political test. That story alone was chilling, but it was just the beginning. Next came the case of Steve Jensen. For nearly 2 decades, Jensen's career was defined by leading counterterrorism and organized crime investigations. His reputation inside the Bureau was one of professionalism and resilience. In fact, Patel himself had once praised Jensen as embodying the best of what the public expects from the FBI. Yet when Jensen participated in investigations tied to January 6, his career took a sudden and devastating turn. After investigating politically sensitive cases, he was dismissed. Ross made clear that this wasn't just an internal HR shuffle. It appeared to be a direct consequence of him doing his duty in a politically charged case. To make matters worse, political voices online had targeted Jensen, criticizing Patel for not removing him sooner. The sequence of events suggested that outside political pressure, rather than performance, dictated his fate. For anyone watching, the message was disturbing: working on the wrong case could end your career. And then came the story of Walter Jardia, a decorated combat veteran and a Bureau man through and through. Jardia had decades of service under his belt. His expertise was critical in high-profile national security cases, including investigations into foreign interference and high-level political allies. His resume should have shielded him from doubt. Instead, it placed him squarely in the crosshairs. Jardia had been part of the investigation into foreign election meddling, and his work extended to probing one of the nation's most politically connected figures. Soon after, he too was dismissed. Ross framed it starkly: 3 men, 3 decades-long careers, all ended after their assignments placed them in politically sensitive terrain. The pattern was undeniable, and Patel's denials began to sound hollow under the weight of specific names and facts. At this point, the hearing took on the feel of a courtroom drama. Ross wasn't dealing in hypotheticals. She said as much: these aren't imaginary scenarios, they are the things that happened during Patel's tenure. Each name she introduced wasn't just a person, it was a piece of evidence. Driscoll's valor, Jensen's expertise, Jardia's combat record. All 3 represented pillars of FBI professionalism, and all 3 had been toppled. The cumulative effect was devastating. For viewers, it became clear that Ross wasn't simply accusing Patel of breaking promises, she was painting him as a director who traded the Bureau's credibility for his own survival in a political storm. What made Ross's line of questioning so powerful was how it peeled away the layers of rhetoric and forced a confrontation with consequences. This wasn't just about individuals losing jobs, it was about whether America's most powerful investigative body was still capable of acting independently. If agents are punished for taking politically inconvenient cases, what happens to the investigations that touch powerful people? What happens to national security if experience and courage are discarded in favor of political loyalty? These questions weren't left hanging, they were driven home with every name Ross invoked. By linking these firings to Patel's own words from his confirmation hearing, Ross made the stakes clear. Under oath, Patel had vowed that performance and adherence to the law would be the sole standards. Yet the evidence showed otherwise. In each case, performance was exceptional. Law was upheld. The only common denominator was politics. That's why Ross's final words cut with such force. Patel had flunked his own test. He had chosen self-preservation over principle, his job over the Bureau's integrity. For those watching, the scene crystallized into a story about betrayal, not just of agents but of the American people who rely on institutions to protect them without bias. Beyond the drama of individual cases, Ross's questioning highlighted a much larger concern: the erosion of institutional credibility. The FBI is not just another workplace, it is a cornerstone of law enforcement and national security. Its agents wield immense power, from counterterrorism to organized crime, from cyber attacks to public corruption. When the public believes those decisions are influenced by politics, the damage isn't just internal, it reverberates through democracy itself. Trust in law enforcement is fragile, built on the perception of fairness. Once that perception shatters, it becomes almost impossible to rebuild. Ross made it clear: when law enforcement decisions serve political interests, justice itself is at risk. The hearing also served as a reminder that oversight isn't a formality, it is a lifeline. Without lawmakers pressing these questions, the public might never hear about the firings of Driscoll, Jensen, or Jardia. Without transparency, patterns of politicization would remain hidden. Ross's insistence on connecting Patel's promises to his actions underscored why accountability matters. It isn't about embarrassing leaders or scoring political points, it's about protecting the principles that ensure agencies like the FBI operate for the people, not for the powerful. For viewers, this clash carried lessons that extend far beyond the walls of Congress. It illustrated how fragile the balance is between independence and influence, between law and politics. It showed that even decorated veterans with impeccable service records can be swept aside if they stand on the wrong side of power. And it raised an unsettling question: if this is what happens to the protectors, what happens to the people they are sworn to protect? In that way, Ross's exchange with Patel wasn't just about one director or 3 agents, it was about the health of democracy itself. As the session drew to a close, Patel's evasion stood in stark contrast to Ross's precision. Where he offered generalities, she provided names. Where he denied, she cited evidence. The result was a narrative viewers couldn't ignore: the Bureau's integrity had been compromised, not in whispers, but in lawsuits and firings. And if accountability doesn't follow, the precedent set will echo through every future investigation. The first minute of this confrontation was enough to hook anyone, promises shattered, careers destroyed, and the credibility of an institution on the line. But as the story unfolded, the gravity only deepened. It wasn't just shocking, it was a wake-up call. Because when institutions bend to politics, they stop serving the people. And when that happens, democracy itself begins to erode. What viewers witnessed in that hearing wasn't just oversight, it was accountability in its rawest form. It was a reminder that leadership in law enforcement must be measured not by loyalty to political figures, but by loyalty to the law and to the people it protects. Ross's line of questioning wasn't just about the past, it was a warning about the future. And it leaves us with a responsibility to stay informed, to ask the hard questions, and to demand that our institutions live up to the promises made in our name. So if this breakdown left you thinking, if it made you question how independent our institutions really are, don't just move on, stay with us. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more people can see the full picture. Because in times like these, awareness is power, and the more we shine a light on what's happening, the harder it becomes for power to hide in the shadows.